Okay, so I think we're being broadcast. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Onivino's first live webinar. We're quite excited. I'm going to slowly run through our panelists today. So we have Nate Weiss, winemaker at Twomey and Silver Oak. We have Matt Duncan below, who is the grandson of the founder. We have Vivian Gay, our export director. And we have Daniela Frison from Montreal, and Jessica Midlash as well from Montreal. So yeah, so to start, I think what I'd like to do is give a little background on everybody. So Nate, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Alex. So I actually grew up in the Napa Valley. My father was a winemaker. He started working for the Mondavis in the late 60s. So he was a PhD student actually in public health, which is a fairly relevant subject at the moment. But his focus was mycology, which is yeast. And he and his buddies used to come up to the Napa Valley and sort of, it was a free way to have a few pops on a Saturday. And so they'd drive up and at some point somebody said, hey, you can do this for a living if you study yeast. And so we wound up here. He went back to school and studied winemaking. So I grew up around vineyards. I grew up around wineries. I used to spend the harvest going to visit Dad because he wasn't home so much, but we'd go to the wineries and play around on the catwalks and things. But growing up as a kid, first thing you want to do if you're in the Napa Valley is get out. So it wasn't until I was about 18 that I kind of realized this would be a really cool job. And so when I got out of my undergraduate degree, went back to school, and it's sort of a longer history of my career from there. But I was fortunate enough to be hired by the Silver Oak family in 2014. So it's been a great experience here. I absolutely love working for this family.
Great. And Matt, how about you?
Well, I resonated what Nate just said resonated with me. Growing up, you want to get out. So we lived in Salina and Napa, so very small town, but really the heart of the Napa Valley. Of course, it doesn't mean anything to you when you're in high school. But my granddad first came out to Napa and Sonoma in the late 60s. His college roommate had called him up and said that he had done a crazy thing. He had sold his medical practice and was going to start growing grapes in the Napa Valley. So my granddad came out, reconnected with his roommate and met a man named Justin Meyer, and years later started Silver Oak. My dad came out in the 80s. He needed a job after college and wanted to tour and see the Grateful Dead. So he decided, well, being in California and working for his dad's business was an easy way to do that. Met my mom and traveled selling wine all across the US and the world when I was growing up. And then I went to college and, like everybody else, found my calling selling wine, and been in the family business now 7 years. Actually, yesterday was my seventh year work anniversary. So.
I don't want to interrupt, but Caroline has just written and said that she can't see Vivian or Matt. Are your videos on?
They are, and my camera light is on too. So.
Yeah, and I can see you guys. Okay. We're going to carry on because I wouldn't know how to fix that right now, even if I tried. Vivian, would you like to tell us a brief history about yourself, please?
I will unmute. She could go into speaker view, and then whoever's speaking pops up full.
Okay.
I'm British originally. I grew up in England, moving to California in the early 80s. My father was a major wine collector in London, England. And
you're all on the screen now, sorry. Go ahead.
All right. He was a major collector of wine, and so I grew up in a very early age with wine. He was a Commanderie de Bordeaux and the Chevalier de Champagne, or whatever it is. And with his love of wine, we drank wine at a very early age in my household. And he also would have loved to have had a vineyard in France, but he decided to be one of the pioneers of the British wine industry, and he planted in the 70s vineyards in England. where we lived at the time in Dorset. So he was ahead of the curve. We just grew grapes and he sold the wine to the co-op, and the wine tasted like cabbage water. It wasn't very good. But that being said, he did instill in me the love of wine. So when I moved here in a completely different business, I immediately kind of fell into learning about California wine because I had grown up in Europe. I knew a lot more about European wine. So, and now I've been with Silver Oak. I'm coming up to my 9th anniversary in next week actually, and with Silver Oak, and I found my happy place.
And that would be our anniversary because we've been working with you for about 9 years too.
Yes, you have. You came on shortly after I started.
Yeah, so we're very lucky. I've learned a lot from Vivian, actually. Daniela is my mine and Jessica's tasting coach, rather. We both take our diploma with the Wine and Spirits Education Trust together, and she's a godsend and a very talented lady, very educated, all sorts of awards under her belt. And she also has a business called Le Vin Nécessaire. Do you want to give us a little briefing on that?
Yeah, so it started like a bit of a side project, which I would like to develop full time. I would like to. The aim of it was to make wine more approachable, less snob, because especially here in Quebec, we have to pass via monopoly. So it's not like in France, right? It's not cheaper than water. It's not something that many people grew up with. It's more considered like a luxury product. And I would like to break that image of wine being absolutely super expensive and you really have to have the knowledge to drink it or buy it. So wine at the beginning for me, it's more about creating a link and create an experience and bring memories and taking you back to a place or a feeling that I had. So I'm buying for private, and it's not, I can buy whatever you want, but if you tell me I want to feel like I'm on the beach somewhere, or I feel like, well, I remember when I went to Europe this time, or I just want to chillax with a nice bottle of wine, I'm trying to give you the best quality price that I can find for you. Everything, it's a tailor-made experience for you. So yeah, I'm still working on that.
Well, I think that's what makes you such a good coach for us too, because you always instill that sense of play. So I can see.
Yeah.
I mean, I would like to be on a beach somewhere right now.
Yeah.
That's right.
And we have to stay apart. Don't get too close. Well, then last but not least is our beloved Jessica Midlash. So Jessica is a partner at Bremner and Garde Manger. She is the wine buyer and directs their wine program, as well as all of the operations within the restaurants. And Jessica and I were talking previously about how grateful we are for our beloved hospitality industry at the moment, because despite all the rough times, I mean, that everyone's going through, not just us, but we're quite impressed to see the list of attendees, that all the staff that, is taking the time to better their knowledge. So I'll let Jess take it from here.
Yeah, listen, Montreal's a very passionate city, and I find that a lot of that passion is found in the service industry. I'd say, I can't even give you an exact percentage, but I would say somewhere around like 90% of the service industry right now has been unfortunately temporarily laid off due to the circumstances. So everyone, including myself, and we find ourselves sitting at home on our computer being like, well, how do we improve our knowledge, and how do we better ourselves, and how do we keep ourselves busy until we get a chance to go back to work? We're kind of waiting for the coach to call us back in, like, you guys can go. So a lot of people, I think it's really great. A lot of wine agencies have been offering home deliveries for their private import wines, which has been super helpful. So I know a lot of people that are kind of doing like what we're doing now, but like online tastings. People are doing a lot of research, trying to do online wine classes or like recipe testing, all kinds of fun stuff. And, tuning into very informational, webinars, kind of conversations that we're having now. So there's a lot of restaurants in Montreal, and there's a lot of competition, and we're a pretty small city for the amount of restaurants that we do have. So it's competitive, and people want to be on top of their game. So kudos to all the industry who's working hard on bettering themselves, and thanks to Onivino for setting this up. I was really looking forward to this. So
Well, listen, like you said, we all have to get innovative and creative and up our game, and I'm having a lot of fun so far, so yay. So I guess we'll dive into the Silver Oak and Twomey story, and you know, most of our attendees get to hear me say it all the time, so I am so honored to give you Nate, and he can give you a bit of that background, and we'll start asking questions after that.
Sure, thanks, Alex. So Matt's grandfather, as he said, founded it with Justin Meyer in 1972. So we're rapidly approaching our 50th anniversary. This will be our 49th vintage. So in a previous life, I worked for the Antonori family. 49 is not super impressive to them necessarily. In California, almost 50 years is a pretty big deal in the wine business. Silver Oak was kind of one of the first real cult wines, had a very serious following. We've kept very tightly to a release schedule where we only release one wine. We only make 2 wines. We release one of them every 6 months, basically, in August and February. And for a long time standing, we've had sort of a party, you know, basically a chance for people to come and taste the wine. And it sort of started out with people, that was the only way you could get the wine, especially if you wanted a large format bottle. So people would sort of
exporting to Quebec back then.
Yeah. So I used to work
now. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
No worries. I used to work down the street on Oakville Crossroad, which is where the winery is located, and people would literally be camping out on the crossroad the night before, waiting for the doors to open because they wanted that 3-liter bottle, they wanted that 6-liter bottle. So Silver Oak has always had that kind of following, and we have, you know, 3 very basic kind of core values that we've stuck to over almost 50 years. One is we only make Cabernet Sauvignon. Originally, Ray and Justin only wanted to make a single wine, like the great Bordeaux houses. With the advent of the AVA system in California and sort of the chance to be in Napa Valley and Alexander Valley, that sort of changed. They started making 2 wines. For a short period, they made 3, which is a whole other story. We're going to age it only in American oak, which is really kind of cool. Back in the 70s, that wasn't quite as unusual as it sounds now. In the 70s and the 60s, some of the great wines in Napa Valley in the 50s were all made in essentially whiskey casks. Andrei Chelichev, for example, who's probably the most famous enologist in Napa Valley history, arguably, he loved American oak. So when he was at BV way back when, they only used American oak. So in the 70s, you couldn't get as good as French oak from Europe. So it was very common to use American oak, but we're one of the few that have sort of stuck to it. And in fact, the Duncan family owns a cooperage in Missouri where we make our own barrels. So we've sort of doubled down on the idea that we're going to do American oak and only American oak. And then we have this kind of long release cycle. So our current releases are 2015 Cabernets, which is totally normal for us. It sounds like it sounds a little bit behind everybody else, but that's our cycle. Every 6 months, one comes out. And the idea was basically that Ray and Justin wanted to sell people wine that was ready to drink. In the 70s, a lot of people were selling you wine that was really, really tannic, really hard, and saying, you know, open it up in 10 years. So at this point, we're making 2 wines, an Alexander Valley Cabernet and Napa Valley Cabernet, and we have, Silver Oak has 2 wineries, one in Healdsburg and one in Oakville, and each focuses on one of those 2 wines. The other really interesting thing we do is the family now has a couple other brands. They started Twomey in 1999, and Twomey has really become sort of focused on Pinot Noir mostly. We're going to talk about Merlot in a little while, which is what we started out doing, but we're now making almost a dozen different single vineyard Pinot Noirs, and we make some Sauvignon Blanc as well, which is the only white wine we make. And Twomey's kind of fun because it can be whatever we want it to be, whatever interests us, wherever we want to go. So we now actually operate a number of different wineries for Twomey. We have one in Healdsburg, which is in the Russian River Valley, where we make Pinot Noir and Sauvignon Blanc. We have a winery now in Anderson Valley, where we do the Anderson Valley Pinot Noir, which is really cool, a really kind of interesting remote part of California where the Pinot Noirs are just really unique and singular. We have a winery in Calistoga where we make the Merlot that we're going to talk about. And then we are now operating in Oregon. So we're a multi-state multi-state winery now, which is really cool. It's sort of for the people that do what I do for my team, it's a lot of fun because we get to see so much different ground, so much different terroir, so much different winemaking. It's really invigorating to just see all the different approaches. And then a couple of years ago, the family bought a winery called Ovid, which is on Pritchard Hill. It's sort of the Rodeo Drive of Napa Valley. It's a very exclusive, high-end grape growing region. It's not technically an AVA, but most people have heard of it. Some of the big players in Napa Valley are up there. Continuum,
Chapelet, of course.
Chapelet, Colgan. And the winery is called Ovid Napa Valley, and it's an estate vineyard and winery that makes 1,500 cases a year, and it's mailing list only, and it's certified organic farms. So it's a really kind of interesting counterpoint to all the rest of the stuff that we do.
Okay, thank you. A lot of us are really interested in talking about you guys going in the direction and building that Platinum LEED winery. Can you shed some light, on that for us, please?
Sure, and I'll probably hand it off to Matt in a little while because there's a very serious family connection. His sister was really the one that managed the project in Healdsburg, at least. So it all kind of starts really actually more than a decade ago when our Oakville winery had a pretty serious fire, and we ended up rebuilding that, tearing down what remained and rebuilding that winery. And at the time, the goal was to really go after LEED certification. LEED is Leadership in Energy Environmental Design. It's a certification from the U.S. Green Building Council, and they have a number of levels. So they have LEED certified, gold, silver, and then platinum is the very highest level. Excuse me, sorry. And so the goal in Oakville when we rebuilt that winery was to be as sustainable in building as we could. And we really wanted to go after LEED certification, but we were essentially homeless at the time. So speed was, expediency was much more important than going through the process. But we did it the right way. And once that winery was rebuilt, we knew we had to do one in Alexander Valley too. We'd been sort of operating in another winery that wasn't quite ideal, and we'd always said, well, do we sort of remodel this place, or do we just go somewhere new and start fresh? And the family eventually decided to start fresh, and that had a very long sort of runway to it, that project. So we bought the property in 2012 and didn't really anticipate opening the winery until 2016 or 2017. So there was a lot of planning that went into it, and we really got a chance to do it right. In the meantime, we started to certify the Oakville winery in sort of the existing building way. So going back and looking at what was done, making any upgrades we needed to for energy efficiency or water efficiency. And so Oakville actually was certified before Healdsburg was, but Healdsburg was very close to certainly, I think, my heart, the family's heart, because it was the first kind of ground up LEED Platinum winery. And the reason that's kind of important is when I was a graduate student at Davis, they've been talking about sustainable building for a while, and it was usually said it just couldn't be done on a commercial level. So UC Davis, the university itself was building their winery that way, but they really said, I don't know if this is applicable to a winery that's making 20,000 cases or whatever. And I think the family really took that as a challenge and said, well, we'll see about that. So it's hard to do because it's sort of a winery as far as a architect or an engineer is concerned. It's basically a processing plant, and it's kind of hard to do sustainable building that way. And Matt, you got anything to add about the process?
Yeah, I just, to give everybody sort of a nutshell of what we accomplished and what my sister helped do with the new winery in the Alexander Valley, really three key areas of innovation. So the first is the building materials that the winery is built out of. You come visit, maybe we have pretty pictures we can cut to, but if you look at the Alexander Valley online, building materials and building it as much as we could out of recycled materials. So you see the exterior, if you look online, those are all redwood wine tanks, recycled from other wineries. So Nate's story before American oak, everybody was using redwood around here. And so we repurposed that for the exterior. fire-damaged California oak trees for the interior, denim jeans for insulation. So the building, we used as much recycled material as we could. Power, solar panels, that's pretty easy to understand. What's sort of another level of achievement was designing 105% of our energy requirement to be produced on the site in the vineyard, and solar panels on top of the winery. All that's produced on site. Of course, it's a game to sell the credits back and keep the winery moving year round when you don't have as much sun. But the point is we achieved that. And then really, I think the most interesting thing in agriculture and how we innovated in the Alexander Valley was the membrane bioreactor, a big, ugly word for a machine that basically recycles the water that we use in the winery. And that's helped us move our water to wine ratio from, I think, an industry average of maybe 10 gallons of water used to produce 1 gallon of wine, so 10 to 1, to almost about 1 to 1 at the new winery. So it's really, really doing an excellent job for our resources, our limited water resources. And the truth is that machine's not working perfectly yet. So we have a bit of improvement we can do there. But building materials, energy, and water, those are the kind of main buckets that we really innovated on at the new winery.
Yeah, having visited myself, I'm still kind of blown away. And that was, you know, when was I there last? A year and a half ago. It's really quite something. Ladies, do you have any questions? Oh, thanks, babe.
There we go, Vivian.
We can send, we're sending a video out to people after, so I'm more than happy to do some attachments when I send that out. Ladies, did you want to interject with some questions on that?
Jess, do you have anything to say?
Not at this exact moment.
I would like to ask something. I don't know if further we're going to be talking about that, especially, you know, right now for all this talk about global warming, and we're still analyzing how is it affecting and how will be affecting it. Especially for you, what you've seen on Merlot or on Cabernet, is there something that you have already changed, as for example, canopy management, the way the leaves are being managed for shadow, or will you be thinking about maybe changing orientations or replanting or choosing different rootstocks? How is it on that technical, talking about the global warming?
So I believe fairly strongly in kind of replenishing the vineyards at all times, moving through, you know, the useful life of a vine is limited. It might be 40 or 50 years, but when you own the acreage that the family owns, which is about 650, you can't really wait till it's all done and it's all declining before you start to replant. So we have a fairly regular replant schedule. And quite honestly, I think if you were planting a vineyard right now and you weren't thinking about global warming and what's to come, you should have your head examined. Yeah, we're looking at everything that has to do with what the environment we think is going to be, which includes row directions, spacing, trellising, quite honestly. So one thing we've done is we've moved almost entirely away from what they call vertical shoot positioning, which basically means instead of the shoots every year growing straight up, we've added cross arms to spread the wires out so that the shoots can kind of slough out, provide some shading. There's a row orientation that we think is around 20 degrees off of north, off of true north, that gives you a lot of benefit in terms of balancing the sun exposure on both sides of the vines. Irrigation, we think, is one of our best tools, not just for quality, but for longevity. So I think all of those things go into it. Micro sprinklers, straight shade cloth. There's a lot of different tools we can use, and we're looking at all of them because.
So you're constantly evolving what your practices in the vineyard.
I think that's probably our core tenet as a wine making team is we have a saying that it's almost ad nauseum around here, but we have yet to make our best bottle of wine. And so we're constantly looking at what's next, what's the next innovation,
Nice.
What's the next adoption really. You know, innovation's one thing, but adopting innovations in other industries and other technologies is maybe even better. let somebody else kind of figure it out, and then we adapted to grape growing and winemaking.
And how about, for example, do you have your own clone of cab, or do you use more mass and selection? How does it work?
We do, there is a Bonnie's Vineyard clone. So that's, I sort of referred to a third wine, and a long time ago we made a third wine called Bonnie's Vineyard. It was a single vineyard Cabernet Bonnie was Justin Meyer's wife, the original winemaker. We stopped making that wine, even though people still ask us about it. It's been almost, what now?
30 years.
30 years, yeah. My math isn't so good, but it's been almost 30 years. People still ask us about the Bonnie's Vineyard, but there was a clone source that came from there that we have used in certain places, but actually what we find is what we go back to over and over and over again as far as plant material is kind of the old heritage California selections. Clones are exciting to talk about, but we refer to them by number typically, so they're not that fun to,
not very romantic.
Clone.
But there's no silver bullet to climate change. Or just plant this new clone of cab, and that's
no,
not.
Yeah, definitely not. But some clones are adapted more to environments like Bordeaux, which is it's quite different than what we have here.
Right.
It's similar to the Burgundian clones of Pinot Noir that are designed to ripen up early and be harvestable before the rain season comes. In California, we just don't. We have kind of the opposite set of problems, that we have plenty of sun, and we need something that's going to hold on to acidity longer because we have a warmer climate and more light. But by the same token, one of the reasons that Oregon and Anderson Valley are so attractive is they're being quite positively affected by climate change right now, at least. So Oregon's climate's becoming much more reliable from year to year. Instead of 3 or 4 really challenging vineyards out of 10, or vintages out of 10, you might have 1 or 2 at this point, and Anderson Valley as well. So Anderson Valley is a much cooler climate. It's usually about 2 weeks behind Sonoma County at large, and it's kind of gotten more reliable as far as climate, and a little bit warmer, and the harvest window's moved into a period that makes us a little less nervous about it actually getting ripe.
Right. Okay. And a little other question. Your wines are basically blends, right? You have for the Napa, you have, I think, Atlas Peak, and also like 3 or 4 different vineyards for each one of them. That I guess also that the blending portions, it's constantly evolving and adapting to the climate. Would you mind sharing a little bit of the blending philosophy for the Napa Valley, Alex, for the Napa Valley and the Alexander Valley, please?
Yeah, it has changed over the years. Part of that is climate. Part of that is just we've only had 3 winemakers. I'm the third, but that we all have. We think wine style and blending is very personal. So 2014 is when I started, and part of the reason I was lucky enough to be selected for the job is I saw the wine world the same way that my predecessor did in a lot of ways, but that we all have slightly different takes on what's ideal. I would say that interestingly enough, and it's sort of counterintuitive, the move in Napa has been towards actually less Cabernet Sauvignon and more Merlot and more Cabernet Franc, more Petit Verdot, which is kind of an interesting development. You kind of think the opposite, given that it's getting warmer and Cabernet is kind of a later season variety. But what we find actually is Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot have responded quite well to climate change. And then in Alexander Valley, about 2011, 2011 was an unusually cold vintage here. But that year we started blending other varieties into the Alexander Valley. Prior to that, it had been 100% Cabernet. So we've continued that process, and now it's typically 5 to 8% other varieties as well. A lot of Merlot, occasionally Cabernet Franc and Malbec. So we have responded, and we've mixed up our planting plans as well to kind of respond to what we see in the environment changing.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Jess, do you have any questions on that style of
No, that was super well asked and well answered. So I am good. I have lots of notes in front of me right now. It's fantastic.
I was thinking that given we're a little more than halfway through, it's probably a good idea for us to start going through the wines. So the girls have a bottle of the Twomey Merlot. So I don't know, maybe if Matt, do you feel like walking the girls through a Merlot tasting?
Yeah, a little Merlot tasting, sure.
Thank you.
You know, it's an interesting segue to talk about blending and the way we blend Silver Oak and the Twomey Merlot, because this is really a wine that came out of a blending challenge. That blending challenge started in the kind of the mid-90s when both Silver Oak wines were 100% Cabernet, but we wanted to change the Napa to achieve that consistency, that quality that Silver Oak is so famous for. And so what we wanted to do was put some Merlot in the blend. Well, that was easier said than done. It took us about 5 years before we could find a vineyard, this is in the 90s again, that could add some really world-class Merlot to the Silver Oak Napa blend. So by the time we found that vineyard, we realized that our quest had been achieved, but maybe a little more than we would have wanted. So we had too much Merlot for the Napa blend, about 40 acres of it. It's our Soda Canyon vineyard in Southeast Napa. And so the result that came out of that acquisition was starting a new wine label. So Twomey is named after my great-grandmother. She was Velma Twomey. So my granddad named it after his mom. And effectively, with this beautiful, beautiful Merlot that we didn't need for Silver Oak, we decided to create a, at that time, single varietal Merlot. And it was really influenced by the techniques of Pomerol in the old world. So our second winemaker, Nate's predecessor, Dan, had worked in Pomerol. He'd worked at a winery called Petrus. And his vision was to do something that we had never done, which was use French oak and produce a wine that really achieved this sort of velvety tannin. That's what Merlot is really, really famous for, particularly in Bordeaux. And so we make this wine in a really traditional way. This is soutirage, so racking the wine from the bottom of the barrel, one of my first jobs at the winery. So sous, under a tirage, pull, so pulling the wine from the bottom. This helps aerate, soften some of the tannins, so that and then we egg white fine it to help the sediment settle in the bottom. We had the cellar master from Petrus come and show our cellar workers how to do this originally. They've in turn become masters in their own right, having done this for more than a decade now on the 2 decades on the Twomey Merlot. And then in 2011, we kind of took our partnership and friendship on the Merlot to the next level and hired Jean-Claude Burrouet, who was the winemaker at Petrus and Dominus in Napa for many years. He started in 1964, I guess, and retired from that full-time operation, but became our consultant for the Twomey Merlot and still partners with Nate and the Twomey winemaking team on the Merlot. So a little Cab Franc, little Cabernet Sauvignon, I think also in this blend, but mostly Merlot. And what we're looking for is that sort of textured, velvety quality in it, as opposed to the structure and big, Cabernet styles. But same vineyard, Silver Oak Napa mostly comes from, just a different impression of it, if you like to think of it that way.
So this one, sorry, so if you could just repeat that, there's small amounts in this 2014 vintage of Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Petit Verdot, or did I misread that?
There may be.
Okay.
You'll forgive us. We were just tasting the 26.
Absolutely, don't worry about that.
In a month, so the blends are a little scrambled in our brain. But the idea is that the wine represents the vineyard well, and so that is the vast majority is Merlot. It represents the vintage well. So 2014, a really classic year in Napa. That was my sister's first year and Nate's first year at the winery, and so that's the idea behind it.
And do you guys play around with, the other, like the Cabernet Sauvignon, Petit Verdot, based on the vintage? But you always put, like, let's say.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So what is let's say in this one, sorry to cut you off, in this one example, are we talking about like 75, 85% Merlot?
It's usually closer to 90.
90, okay, great.
Yeah, about 90%.
Fantastic.
No, Vivian's shaking her head.
No. It's more like 80%.
Yeah. It's because
it's about 80%.
Older vintage, because we're always a little behind in Quebec because there's always a very long delay before release. So the girls are drinking the 14, which is what we are.
Okay, so if they're drinking the 14, I'm looking it up as we speak. So
it's 79, I think. I think it's 79 Merlot.
I think it's about 80%, but hang on. Don't want to put you.
Not that he
But this is what Jess makes me do when I come to
Anybody.
tastings with her. She's like, but wait, this is why we love Jess. She's very precise.
Particular.
79, okay, you want precision. 79.7% Merlot.
9.7, beautiful.
8.3% Cabernet Sauvignon. 7.9% Cabernet Franc. And with this vintage, 4.1% Petit Verdot.
Thank you very much.
14 is the only vintage, in fact, if I can recall, that we actually blended any Cabernet Sauvignon in. It's usually around 80% or so Merlot, and then the balance is between Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot.
Yes, okay, great.
Thank
Nate,
you.
you want to take us into the blending room and describe what it's like to blend?
Yeah, God.
Yes, yes.
It's funny
that would
now,
be
that was-
fascinating.
That was so long ago. And actually, I'm the worst person to ask about the blends at any given time because I'm on 2020 right now. That's my main focus. So 2014 seems like a lifetime ago, especially given the situation in the world right now. But
Yeah.
so I was thinking about that, Viv, and that was the only year we ever added Cabernet Sauvignon. And
Wow.
it had very much to do with the growing season. So 2014 was kind of in the midst of the drought, and there was a Cabernet block at Soda Canyon that just it really stood up well at that point to the drought, and it had the texture of the Merlot. I think without Merlot loves what the French call the cold soils, sort of the higher clay content, a little bit more water holding capacity. We're in this drought, so it just felt like the texture we needed was going to come from Cabernet that year, not come from Merlot. So it's one of the things I love about blending with Jean-Claude Barraway is he kind of sees these things coming. He sees the freight train at the end of the tunnel coming at him. And I think when we were in the blending room, he asked about what Cabernet do you have that's soft, supple, has this sort of attractive quality? And we said, Cabernet, we're blending the Merlot, man. What are you talking about? But the man knows what he's doing. He did it for a very, very long time. So
Yes. Master.
I would like to just, if it's possible, to ask you if you guys a little bit more questions. Vivian, this is for you. Your demographics. For example, do you have? Well, first of all, before demographics, what's your biggest market? Does it remain the States? Is it Canada? Is it Japan?
Our largest market is, of course, our domestic market in the United States. Yeah. After that, it's a toss-up. It varies from year to year between Canada as a whole and Japan. Japan is really, really at the moment our largest export market.
I have the chance of going quite often to the States, and I see your wines being extremely present at the ABC stores. Is this? I'm just saying, especially, we go to Hawaii a lot, and it's nice because if I want to go there, it's something sure it's there. You have Silver Oak, you have Twomey with 3-4 other brands that they're constantly there. Were you expecting this? Is it something that is like a big source of income having that on the ABCs, or was it?
No, 80% of our wine is actually sold in restaurants, and Matt can really talk from a California perspective of how we not really in America. This is in the United States, 80% is sold in restaurants. Outside of typically, I will say right now things are a little different. Outside of the United States, it's a very different picture. But Matt is really in charge of the retail in California, and he can maybe.
Did you say, Daniela, you were in Hawaii?
I did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now that's very interesting because every state is different, and every U.S. state has different laws about where the wines can be sold. So in some states, for instance, Utah, everything is sold to retail because the state of Utah has to buy the wine before a resort or restaurant can get it. And in Hawaii, it's kind of interesting because that is one of our highest restaurant-focused states. Very, very difficult difficult to find the wine off premise, but it's funny that you saw it in Hawaii. So the way we manage those two different channels of sales between wine shops and restaurants is through allocation. So every wine retail shop that has Silver Oak or Twomey was allocated a case, and we're a little flexible about when they have to pick it up, since we only release obviously the one vintage a year of the different wines. But they get their allocation, and most of them buy it on release, and then that's it. When it's sold, it's gone. So we're lucky to see it there.
Okay, perfect. And now I would like to go back to demographic, because for me, this is a fascinating subject. Who drinks what, at what age, and from what's their backgrounds, because it influences so much. I know I was raised with we like spicy food and we like acid. So somehow I'm gonna be familiar with this, and some people are not. Would you have any idea who's your main demographics? Is it a male, female, or restaurants? Just if you can give us I know it's a very large question.
Well, we do. It's kind of interesting. Nate mentioned earlier the release party, which happens twice a year. So we have fans, Silver Oak fans from all over the world come to the winery twice a year and celebrate the new release wine. And so you really get a snapshot of who our consumers are and who our fans are. And it's remarkably, yes, we have people who've been drinking wine, collecting wine for decades, but we also have people that are coming up to Napa and Sonoma for maybe the first or second time, local people in the Bay Area. And there are plenty of people, my age, certainly under 40, there are a lot. So we're very confident we have a diverse group of fans all over the world.
So let's say you have a whole spectrum from like baby boomers to millennials.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
And what we found, it's sort of interesting that the brand maintains this sort of identity, but it's really a celebratory wine. And the way most folks become acquainted with Silver Oak is with their family, and they celebrate over the holidays, and they want to pass that on. So if they'll, have Thanksgiving or Christmas and remember dad or mom opening, or, grandparents opening a bottle of Silver Oak, and that was part of, a formative experience growing up, and the first time maybe they got to try wine at a holiday event.
Yeah, for sure. Okay.
And then years later, they want to try it themselves.
That's beautiful. You create an emotional link, and it's exactly what I was talking about it before, how to connect with the wine through some emotions or some feelings. And personally, the first time I saw Silver Oak was on a steakhouse. When I was 17, 16. So it does create a click for me, like wine and steak and that. So, great, perfect.
It's also, it's fascinating to see how the different brands have different customers. There's some crossover, but we have people that love Twomey, and they came across it when they visited the Russian River Valley, and quite often they don't even know the association with Silver Oak. They don't even know that the two are related somehow.
I know, I love connecting those dots actually in my market.
Yeah.
It's really fun. Speaking of Twomey, I'm going to ask you guys to pull a bit of a magic trick now, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, because this is how we do business, but do you think we can go over a few of the other wines that we have coming to market for our listeners? And I'm going to send this out to our mailing list after, and maybe do a few-minute description on each of them so that they kind of have a sense of what's coming, because they probably won't want me to come and meet them. So I need you to do that as best as you can. So I'll since we were talking about Twomey, I have, we just received not long ago the Monument Tree Pinot. We have a few cases of that kicking around. So is there any way we can talk about that, and then we can go into the Alex and the Napa Valley? I'll give you the vintages. But the Monument Tree, I have the 2016.
Yeah, so Monument Trees, the family owns they own about 650 acres, and that's spread over about 15 different vineyards. And I have this argument with my viticulturists quite a bit as to what the jewel in the crown is, and Monument is always in the discussion. So this is a vineyard in Anderson Valley. It's in what locally is referred to as the deep end, which basically means it's in the western part of Anderson Valley.
Okay.
It's sort of a transverse valley that runs out towards the coast in Mendocino County.
Yeah.
So the further west you get, the closer you get to the Pacific Ocean, the more fog influence you have, and really the kind of the colder the climate gets. In this span, 10 miles of distance by car on the highway means maybe 2 to 3 weeks of ripening window difference, which is kind of fascinating, really. And really, Monument Tree is at the very western edge of what what really used to be, long ago, was considered still wine country. So anything west of there was basically considered to be sparkling wine. Of course, that's changed over the years, but it's a north.
Why is it called Monument Tree?
Yeah, it's called Monument Tree because there's a beautiful. What's it? What do they think? How old do they think the tree is, Matt?
It's a couple hundred years old. I mean, it's
yeah, like that was. I want to say 300 years old.
Yeah.
Gigantic redwood tree.
One. Thanks, Viv.
Yeah, there's this 2017. Vivian, you're so on top of everything. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, what else you got in there? Always pulling stuff out. It's amazing.
So this tree is probably 80 feet tall, and it's been struck by lightning 3 or 4 times. So it's sort of it's kind of bald at the top where the lightning has sort of sheared all the limbs off, but that is the Monument Tree, and it's about 20 acres of Pinot Noir. And so it's a single vineyard we've been making now for, God, probably since 2010, Matt?
Yeah, that's when we bought the vineyard.
Yeah. So
Very cool.
really, really cool place. What I love about Anderson Valley Pinot is that the aroma profile is not, it's got a lot of that dark Pinot fruit, but it's not just fruit. There's a lot of savory character. I think because we stand in it so often and we look at these redwood trees, there's always an association with sort of a mulchy redwood bark character aromatically, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And sort of these cool climate Anderson Valley Pinots, they have a lot of color naturally. They have a lot of structure. It's just a really, I think it's one of the undervalued gems of California Pinot Noir is Anderson Valley, in part because it's so remote.
Jess, what am I missing as far as like what our staff would want to hear?
There we go. There's the Monument Tree.
Oh wow, it's so small.
That was us on that was a rainy December day.
Oh, that's amazing.
Who's climbed it to the top?
That's a very good question. I don't know if anybody has. I certainly have not.
All right, next time I'm in the valley.
One of my sons would love to do that, though.
Yeah. Jess, did I miss any questions?
No, I mean, I had more of a comment, which going back to like the demographic and who's buying the wines, I would say, I mean, at Garde-Manger and Le Bremner, it's funny, every time we sell a bottle, I'm always curious to know kind of like, oh, like, where are you from? Or like, I always like to, like, when someone, is investing a bit of money on a wine list to buy a bottle, I always kind of like to schmooze them a little bit and get some insider. And most of the people are from California, which I'm always like, really? And they're like, yeah, I mean, like, and that's the thing. They always have a beautiful memory or like, oh, I went with the family, or it's either people from Quebec who've traveled and visited your vineyards and have tasted the wine somewhere who have this like nostalgic, oh, I'm here with my family, we're celebrating, we're going to get a bottle of that. So I was going to say great job on that brand association for your clientele, because people really do love it, and it's an honor to
yeah, it's a very dedicated following, I would say as well. I can feel it when I'm with them. Listen, we have 9 more minutes, guys, and I
have one last question, and then I'll just shut it. So let's say I'm talking here as a buyer, right? So because I buy for privates and let's say I buy for myself. I don't think I can give names and I don't want to get in trouble, but let's say for the Alexander Cab and for Napa Valley Cab, you have very similar wines priced almost the same price, let's say. Besides you guys being so very nice, but that's not always the selling point. I cannot tell a wine because the winemaker is nice or because Vivian's been to Ecuador. Why would I buy from you? What does make to me and Silver Oak so special that I will choose you?
Yeah,
I think it goes back to the fact that we have been around nearly 50 years.
Okay.
We have some of the loyalist consumers, and I have been in the industry quite a long time, not 50 years, but a long time. We do have some of the most loyal consumers in the world. The brand has incredible strength throughout the world, and I speak as the international sales director, and we're sold now in 52 different countries. So there's huge awareness for Silver Oak. The other thing I think about Silver Oak in particular too is that consumers, when they buy Silver Oak, they know what they're getting because the wine is very, very consistent. As Nate said earlier, we still haven't made our best bottle of wine yet. And yet every year it's incredibly consistent and everything is sold basically on allocation. So we're one of the very few wineries that, you know, we essentially sell out every year, which is an amazing, it gives a tremendous amount of credit to the Duncan family and to the winemaking team and to the whole bunch in essence. But why would you choose us when you could choose somebody else's Napa Cab or Alexander Valley? I think those are some of the main reasons from my perspective. The wine is solid. People know it and they will purchase it. It's also easy to say, Silver Oak. A little less easy. A lot of people call it Twomey, but it is a family name and it comes from with the same passion, the same attention to detail, the same commitment to excellence that Silver Oak comes with the same winemaking team, the same vineyards in some cases, and of course the same family ownership. So I don't know if Nate wants to add or Matt wants to add something to that, but that's from my perspective how I answer that.
Thank you. No,
I realize there's hundreds of wines out there, thousands of wines out there.
Well, if you guys are going to continue on that, we might as well end on that because we have about 4 minutes left. So
can I just say something, Ali? Sorry to interrupt, but did you see the question and answer piece down at the bottom of the screen?
Yeah, so we're not doing those because there's a bit of a security issue with the way Zoom functions, and
because somebody's asked a question. So,
yeah.
All right.
Okay, but I think we spoke very little about the wine, but as I understand, as you were saying, you're looking for that textures, I guess, to work on the tannins and the blendings and everything you're trying to achieve, and the Merlot being a very not very kind of high acidity-ish, but like a very soft and tender tannins and that, and I thought it was very interesting to have a bit of that. I had like bitter coffee, but earthiness, a bit of like pencil screen supporting the texture with a refreshing acidity, and I had a touch of like raspberry puree covering it up. So I found it beautiful, and you know, maybe it's not the best because it's raining, and I think it affects. But for our quarantine, it's perfect. So thank you, and thank you, Ali, for our wine tonight.
No,
I think the coffee beans. We were talking about Merlot today, and it's something very consistent with the Merlots over the years is sort of these dark roasted aromas, and actually coffee beans. It's something I wish I would have come up with earlier today, but that's
great.
Thanks, Danny.
That's great.
The Merlot is actually, I'm not saying this to impress anyone, but it's always been one of my my favorites in the entire Onivino portfolio. It's always, yeah. And
You've said that to me before, dear Ali, dear Ali.
Ali, I was talking a little earlier with Ali about this, and I think it was a year and a half ago that we had tasted, and I've never, in my vocabulary, Merlot was not one of those grapes that just jumped out at me. And then I was sitting there and we were tasting it at Garde Manger, and I was like, wow, I think I really like Merlot. Like, if this is what Merlot is about, then bring it. It really is a beautiful wine. And
thank you.
But I think people have, like, you know, made this interesting association with Merlot. So if we did call it Pomerol, everyone would just be like, oh, it's a Pomerol, and but it's like, that's Merlot. So there's a bit of a disconnect, I think, with a perception issue, which we don't have time to get into, but I do love Merlot. It's like Cab without that, you know, punch in the throat, which I also like, but it's just so much juicier and mellow, and I'm such a huge fan. So unfortunately, we're running low on time, and I really I guess I know now that I have to schedule these a bit longer, but you know, we've only lost 3 people. That's not too bad. But I really want to thank all of you for your time, and I think you all brought such like pertinent points to this conversation. And Matt, it's so delightful to have a few moments with you. And Vivian, I'll talk to you later as we get to talk to Vivian a lot. And Nate, thank you so much for your time.
Do just so the people that are trying to ask questions, can you explain why we're not answering them?
It's because there's a security issue with the question format, and it's just safer for us to not log into that because you
Can I read it? Can I read them?
want to, sure, but we don't really have time, but go ahead.
One says, I love Malo. Thank you, Kylie. Andrew Albert says, do you have time for questions? Which I guess we don't. And then somebody, John says, what's the latest new wine experiments? Are we doing any quickly in the last couple of minutes, new wine experiments?
You can try. I just don't know if it logs us off. So let's not be offended if it zooms us out, but I'm down to keep
30-second version is we're always experimenting with everything under the sun. We have kind of a SpaceX approach in the sense that I'm okay with if we try something out and 70% of the time, 70% of the things we try don't work. I think the 30% that pay off are well worth that. We're trying things like AI, mechanization, automation where we can, different types of sorting, so on. So all sorts of stuff. Yeah, that's one of the key components to what we do is always be curious, always innovate, always adapt.
And what was the other question that we were missing? We still seem to have.
I can tell you. That was it, really. Do you have time for questions? Andrew didn't ask.
No, Andrew, we don't have time for questions. He's texting me.
And then
everyone's very concerned if we can see them. So no, we can't see any of you in your underwear.
what is the latest new wine experiments? We answered that. You explored and any new for future products, but we're not really doing much. Well, I don't know. I can't speak to that. That would be Nate, really. But so.
All right. Well, Matt, did you
guys.
have something to sign off? We'll have Matt sign us off.
Thank you, guys. Cheers, and everybody stay safe.
Sure.
Cheers.
Namaste. Stay safe. Drink wine. And thank you, Kelly, for organizing this. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you all. Cheers.
Cheers.
Everything.
Cheers. Santé.
Bye.
Matt is going to have the 4th generation of Duncans involved with Silver Oak Twomey here very quickly.
That's right. I'm in my nursery now. Yeah. Cheers.
You're in the nursery.
Congratulations, Matt.
Bye.
Thanks, Nate.
Bye,
Bye,
guys.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Ali, well done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye, Viv.
Anything?
Bye.
You ending us, Ali?
Yeah.